right, we've been getting some viewer feedback from a lot of viewers who say, okay, we hear a lot about the problems, a lot of analysis of everything that's going wrong. What about some solutions? Well, this next story is for you, because anyone who watches this show knows that we devote a great deal of attention to the goings-on in Europe, okay? The debt crisis, the austerity, the economic deflation that has forcefully contracted GDP across the continent, but particularly among the deficit countries. And of course, the poster child of the Eurozone crisis remains Greece, okay? Never out of the headlines, especially not now with Greek elections coming up on Sunday, where really the future of Greece and the Eurozone could remain in the balance. Greece's economy, for its part, has contracted 6.5% in the first quarter of 2012 compared with last year. That's according to the Athens-based Hellenic Statistical Authority. Now, this was the country's 13th contraction in the past 14 quarters, okay? This is a truly dismal state of economic affairs if you stop to think about it for even a minute in the broader picture. Now, we're talking about a depression that has been going on for more than 3 years with no end in sight. And for a few years now, we've been seeing the fallout through protests on the streets, and there you see them. Now, while Molotov cocktails have been aimed at the parliament, it's been tourism that's been the prime target of economic deflation. Greece's tourism industry comprises about 15% of the country's GDP and employs roughly a fifth of the nation's workforce. International arrivals at Greek airports, meanwhile, fell 5% in the first 5 months of the year alone. And that's not to mention the 15% drop in tourism receipts or revenue that Greece's central bank recently reported for the first quarter of the year compared to last year. Okay, the statistics go on. There are many more. By far, solutions in general have centered around governments and central banks and what they can do to stem the crisis. But these measures have proven largely ineffective. They've resulted in those protests on the streets, and they've inspired some, specifically the guest that we were supposed to talk to, but we'll tell you their story, and his colleagues, to take matters into their own hands. Take a listen.
$15,000 will enable us to run a campaign in New York City. And we will amplify that campaign by earning far wider media coverage.
This is to prove that resilience, teamwork, and innovation are still part of the Greek DNA.
Please contribute.
So using the crowdfunding platform known as LoudSoft, Yorgos Kleivokiotis and his colleagues at upgreektourism.gr managed to raise over $20,000 to fund an advertising campaign for tourism in Greece. This included an electronic billboard in Times Square in New York. You can see it there. So right in Times Square, crowdfunded, reminding potential travelers that, hey, regardless of the economic situation, Greece is still a great place to visit. And maybe, perhaps more importantly, bigger picture, sending a message that individuals play a role in this solution. And this is a message that seems to be spreading. There are other examples of this. Now, we're still trying to get Yorgos Kleivokiotis on Skype so we can talk about this. He's co-founder of Up Greek Tourism, having a few problems there, so we'll let you know if we get him. But lucky for you, Dimitri Kofinas is our resident Greek. He is our producer. He found this story. He was inspired by this story. This is his country. And also, this really plays into your feelings about the economy and politics. And I think, you know, one of the big messages, Dimitri, that I want to get your input on is what does this say about the individual's role to do something, to take charge over their economic situation in lieu of government solutions?
Yeah, well, this is a very inspirational story. I found it very inspirational. They were able to exceed their targets. They had, I think, $15,000. They went to $20,000. As you saw, the audience saw, there was a billboard there in Times Square that they had. They have another billboard here in Washington, D.C., and they've been able to crowdfund that. And that, to me, says a lot because the news cycle is centered around what can governments do, what solutions can governments and central banks provide. And it seems that it's presented in a framework so that the only solutions that are available are solutions that are brought from on high, from these institutions. But what we see here is that through technology specifically, and that's also an important point, you're able to scale solutions from the private sector in ways that weren't possible before. And I think that's what's so inspirational about this. You don't have to wait for governments to do something. You can actually get the community, because there are a lot of Greeks outside of Greece. The diaspora is very large. So you can get help to advance, to help recapitalize the Greek economy, get tourism going, without having to rely on a largely inefficient and ineffective government in Greece, specifically enlarge the Eurozone.
Yeah. One thing, because I know you talk to a lot of family in Greece, a lot of people that are dealing with this situation very immediately. Give us a little update on how bleak it is, or just what the reality is.
Well, it's bad. Obviously, it's very bad. It's a depression that's been, I think, I can't remember now, we're in the teens in terms of consecutive contractions, and this quarter contracted 6.5%, or the last quarter, relative to this time last year. So it's a depression, and that economic depression feeds into a social depression, because when you are uncertain about your future, when you think that the future every day that comes is going to be worse than the day before, that causes a social depression, and that affects the people. So it's very difficult. And there's also a sense of anger directed abroad at media outlets and others who Greeks feel like are just strewing the name of Greece in the mud when it's not the case, and the idea that Greeks are lazy and this and that.
And they're not. They're doing things on their own to try and fuel this economic depression and revive tourism and rebrand Greece. And lucky for us, we have Yorgos Kleivokiotis, co-founder of Greek Tourism. We've just been talking about your project and what you accomplished, raising $20,000 in such a short time to put up your own ads to try and get people to travel to Greece. So maybe you could just tell us, you know, aside from the fact that this is inspirational in terms of individuals doing something, what inspired this initiative?
Well, hello. First of all, thank you for having me in the show. Well, everything started a couple of years back when, in 2009, we, you know, the news broke out about the debt situation that Greece was in the middle of this global financial situation, and we thought that there must be something we can do to help the Greek economy and therefore the Greek people. And the two large competitive sectors in the Greek economy is shipping and tourism. Shipping doesn't really need much help. And on the other hand, tourism is very much affected by the image of the country and what's happening inside the country. And at the same time, it helps bring in money from abroad inside the country. So we thought we needed to help and focus on tourism. In the meantime, from 2009 until today, there's been a lot of crowdfunding platforms and different types of campaigns. So we learn about one of these platforms that allows people to co-fund an advertising campaign, and that's how the idea came about.
What I want to know, bigger picture, and we were just talking about this on set, what you think this says about not only the ability of individuals, but the responsibility of individuals to do something either for their own, to control their economic situation or to influence the economic situation in their country, in lieu of always looking to the government for fixes, which clearly the government has not proven very good at in this crisis.
So I think people, civilians in any society, any country, have responsibility, which goes further than just casting their vote every time there's elections. We should all be doing what we can to help improve our society. And I think improving our economy and our society is a very serious and a very difficult problem. And we cannot let the politicians to fix it by themselves, because obviously they're not able to.
Obviously. Quickly, I want to know just what kind of response you got from the Greek community around the world, and also could you have done this without where we've come with technology, where you can crowdfund this way?
Well, the Greek community embraced our campaign. There were, you know, in the very early beginning, it was people were a bit skeptical about it, but it was very easy to collect the money initially. So we raised $20,000 for our first billboard in Times Square, New York. And then we raised a little more than $10,000 for our second billboard that was put in on the 7th Street in Washington, D.C. Last month. And especially back home in Greece, people have been extremely enthusiastic. partly because there's very little good news coming out of the country these days. So people were immediately ready to embrace an initiative that was done by the Greek people without involvement from the politicians and the government, who they consider to be corrupt and incompetent.
Yeah. And no involvement from Brussels or from Germany, which I know has been very popular. Really quickly, I just have about 20 seconds, but you know, we see a lot of scenes of protests, a lot of news of economic depression. Is Greece still a good place to travel to?
Well, I think Greece this year is lower cost than it was before. People are more welcoming and they appreciate more when tourists come and spend their money, and is as beautiful and, you know, as amazing as it's always been.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show and telling us about how you did that. We'll have to see if it happens more broadly, as the Eurozone crisis is not going away anytime soon. Thanks so much. That was Yorgos Kleivokiotis, co-founder of Up Greek Tourism. And that is our show. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to come back tomorrow. And in the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter at Lauren Lyster. You can give us feedback on the show or catch any you missed at youtube.com/Capital account. Watch us on Hulu in HD at hulu.com/Capital-account. Jamie Dimon's on the Hill tomorrow. You are not going to want to miss our show. Have a great night.